There is a ghost that lives in the silence after a single word is spoken. The word is no, and the ghost is guilt. This is a specific, haunting kind of suffering, a weight so many of us carry, but few of us ever truly name. It's that visceral, clenching feeling in your chest, that immediate sense of suffocation that descends the very moment you dare to utter a simple, necessary phrase, "I can't," or "I don't want to," or "I'm not available." You have stated a direct, healthy boundary, a line drawn in the sand to protect your own sanity. And yet you are immediately followed by a crushing, disproportionate weight, as if you have committed a profound moral failure, as if you are personally betraying a set of invisible, unspoken expectations that constantly hover over your head, governing your every move. This is for every single person who has ever felt that phantom weight settle onto their shoulders. For those who have found themselves spiraling into a vortex of self-recrimination and anxiety after simply trying to preserve their own energy. For those who desperately struggle to set boundaries, even when every fiber of their being is screaming for protection, for space, for a moment of peace. If you have ever apologized for needing to breathe, this is for you. The guilt you feel after saying no is not natural. It is not an innate part of your moral compass. It is learned. It is the direct result of a subtle, pervasive form of emotional engineering, a programming built over years, often since your earliest childhood, that subtly and constantly teaches you a devastating lie that your worth as a person is directly linked, even equivalent to your usefulness, to your ability to serve, to please, to be constantly available and accommodating to the needs and desires of others. From an incredibly young age, so many of us learn a brutal calculus of affection, that love, approval, and acceptance are conditional rewards, granted only when we obey, when we are convenient, when we say yes, when we seamlessly put the needs of others above our own. This learning isn't intellectual, it's visceral, emotional, and it takes deep, deep root in our psyche. As adults, we carry this heavy emotional inheritance without ever stopping to question its validity. We continue to say yes, automatically, reflexively, to avoid conflict, to maintain the fragile illusion of harmony, to not be perceived as selfish or difficult. And the most tragic part? We do this even when we know, deep down, that saying yes is quietly destroying us from the inside out, costing us our peace, our energy, and our very sense of self. But the raw truth is entirely different. The guilt we feel is not a sign of our deep empathy. It is a glaring sign of our programming. It is the echo of an old, internalized belief that we are only worthy of love when we are useful. In other words, that our value is conditioned on how much we can willingly sacrifice ourselves on the altar of other people's expectations. This profound distortion leads countless people to believe that saying no is an inherent act of aggression, that prioritizing oneself is a fundamental lack of love, that protecting your own spirit is being cold or insensitive or selfish. And so we go on, day after day, exhausted, resentful, emotionally drained, and utterly hollowed out, but still forcing that smile onto our face, still saying yes with a knot of despair tightening in our throat. What we are proposing here today is a radical break from this perverse, self-destructive logic. It is not just about learning to mechanically say the word no, as if it were a simple linguistic trick. It is about embarking on a journey to understand, at the deepest level, why it has become so astronomically difficult for you, and most importantly, it is about finally recognizing that the guilt you feel was never truly yours to carry. It was placed upon you. It is a weight you were handed, and you have the absolute right to finally set it down. In our time together, we will carefully dismantle, layer by intricate layer, the entire psychological and social system that has been designed to make you feel wrong, guilty, and ashamed for simply taking care of yourself. We will explore the powerful concept of the internal permission slip, that fundamental missing document that grants you the right to exist for yourself. We will understand why so many people feel emotionally obligated to accept everything asked of them, a silent sense of duty that costs them their peace, their energy, and their long-term mental health. And even more importantly, we will show you the first steps on the path to break free from this invisible emotional prison without losing your essential sensitivity and compassion, only gaining profound autonomy and self-respect. Because saying no from a place of clarity and self-worth is not about being harsh or unkind. It is, in its purest form, an act of being free. It is the declaration that your existence is not a resource for others to consume. If this introduction has resonated with you, even a little, then please stay with us. What you are about to hear may profoundly and permanently change the way you relate to everyone around you, and most importantly, the way you relate to and value yourself. The guilt we feel when we attempt to set a boundary arises so quickly, so automatically, that it feels like a natural, inevitable reflex, a universal human reaction to the act of preservation. But this is the most powerful illusion of all. This reflex was not born with you. It was carefully, systematically planted within you, nurtured by a world that often values compliance over authenticity. To truly understand why it is so difficult to set a boundary without being swamped by this feeling, we must courageously pull back the curtain and comprehend the true origin of this emotion. And that origin is rarely simple guilt. It is its much more toxic and insidious relative, shame. This specific type of shame is a poison. It doesn't say, "I did something wrong." It whispers, "I am wrong for wanting this. I am flawed for having this need. I am broken for requiring space." It is this deep, internalized shame that makes us believe on a cellular level that by putting our own needs first, we are being bad people. We are failing in our fundamental duty to others. From our earliest, most formative years, we are taught that being a good person is synonymous with being helpful, docile, and submissive. That saying yes is a supreme virtue, and that refusing or even hesitating is synonymous with rejection, with rudeness, with inherent selfishness. This distorted, dangerous association between personal boundaries and core morality is not accidental. It functions as a powerful tool of social control. We live within a culture that far too often glorifies personal sacrifice, fueled by a perverse logic that insists the more you negate yourself, the more you diminish your own desires, the more you are to be valued and praised. Children are routinely praised for yielding, for sharing even when they are visibly distressed to do so, for giving up their own tiny desires solely to please the adults around them. The critical problem is that this supposed generosity, when it is forced and coerced, does not teach genuine empathy. It teaches performative obedience. It teaches a devastating lesson that you are only worthy of love and approval when you are available and useful to others. Thus, shame becomes an internal emotional control system, a phantom jailer that follows the individual throughout their entire life, perpetually preventing them from recognizing their own needs as legitimate, valid, and important. In adulthood, this programming manifests as a chronic, debilitating guilt. The person feels they must endlessly justify their boundaries, explaining each and every no as if they were confessing to a serious crime. They believe in their heart that refusing a request is failing in their role as a friend, as a partner, as a child. And on the rare occasions when they try with immense effort to establish some kind of protective barrier, the feeling that arises is not relief or safety. It is a flood of guilt and anxiety, as if taking care of oneself were a profound act of betrayal against their very nature. The most devastating part of this entire cycle is that this internalized shame systematically causes us to stop trusting our own judgment. We begin to see essential self-care as selfishness. We see emotional protection as a weakness. We mistake healthy assertiveness for unchecked aggressiveness, and in the process we unwittingly become easy, willing targets for emotional exhaustion and even abuse, because those who have been taught to fear rejection for having boundaries are incredibly easy to manipulate. But it is absolutely vital to understand this. Shame is not a moral compass. It does not accurately indicate what is right or wrong. It merely reflects what has been socially accepted and demanded of you. And so often, what is accepted by society is precisely what dehumanizes and depletes us. The truly good news is that by finally identifying this shame for what it truly is, a control mechanism, not a truth, you can begin the vital work of deactivating it. Recognizing that the guilt for saying no is a conditioned reflex, a learned response, and not a moral fact, is the first monumental step toward freeing yourself. But understanding its origin, while crucial, is still not enough. To truly break its power, it is necessary to turn and look squarely at the environment in which this programming was first installed and took root. This toxic, life-limiting shame does not arise from a vacuum. It is carefully and systematically shaped within specific relational contexts, often so normalized they become invisible to those who are immersed in them. The most determining environment for this is, without a doubt, our childhood. It is there in those early impressionable years of life that we learn, both implicitly and explicitly, which parts of ourselves are acceptable and lovable, and which parts need to be hidden, suppressed, or erased in order to receive love and remain safe. It is also there that so many of us are initiated into the brutal logic of conditional love. Conditional love is often subtle in its execution, but it is always devastating in its impact. It occurs when a child realizes on a deep emotional level that they will only receive affection, attention, or approval when they meet certain external expectations. They are called good when they are helpful, when they are well-behaved, when they do not disturb, when they say yes, when they do not assert their own will or voice their own discomfort. Conversely, by saying no, by expressing a natural frustration or a refusal, that child is ignored, reprimanded, or emotionally punished through withdrawal of love. They learn, therefore, in a lesson that is felt rather than spoken, that being their authentic self is a risky, dangerous endeavor, and that putting their own needs first can and will mean rejection and abandonment. This type of learning is not rational or cognitive, it is visceral and survival-based. It is etched into the very fabric of the body, the nervous system, into our most automatic emotional reactions. A simple, healthy, "I can't," in adulthood can trigger a full-blown unconscious alarm bell of primal abandonment. Because at some critical point in that person's childhood, saying no genuinely meant losing love, connection, and safety. And what does a vulnerable child do when faced with that terrifying choice? They give in. They mold themselves to fit the space provided. They contort themselves into what the environment demands they be. And over time, they forget who they were before the adaptation began. The programmed mind is born from this desperate, necessary survival strategy. The adult who grew up under this regime of conditional love almost invariably becomes someone exquisitely sensitive to disapproval, a person who avoids conflict at all costs, who feels a compulsive need to explain and justify their every decision, who offers more than they can possibly give, and then, in a cruel twist, blames themselves for feeling exhausted and resentful. They do all of this every single day to maintain a bond, even when they can feel that very bond, costing them their own emotional health and integrity. And the cruelest part of this entire pattern, it repeats itself endlessly in adult romantic relationships, in friendships, and in professional environments. The person finds themselves surrounded by demands, constantly saying yes to avoid losing the other's affection or approval, without ever realizing that in this desperate attempt to avoid loss, they are in fact slowly losing themselves, piece by piece. They have become accustomed to negotiating their own authenticity in exchange for mere acceptance. And this terrible exchange over time exacts a very high price indeed: chronic anxiety, deep resentment, professional burnout, and even depression. But there is something even more disturbing to recognize about this cycle. Often, the people around them not only benefit from this compulsive availability, they come to expect it, to demand it. They may manipulate, apply pressure, and engage in conscious or unconscious emotional blackmail the moment a boundary is even tentatively set. And the victim of this dynamic, programmed by shame, almost always ends up believing that the problem is inherently within them, that they are the ones being too harsh, too cold, too selfish. This profound distortion must be dismantled. And for that to happen, it is necessary to speak a raw truth that few dare to say out loud. The people who make you feel guilty for saying no are, most of the time, those who do not truly see or respect you. They see what you provide. This will be the focus of our next step, and it may be one of the most liberating and uncomfortable truths you have ever had to confront. There inevitably comes a moment on this path where you need to look with brutal and unflinching clarity at your relationships and ask yourself a simple, piercing question. Why do certain people react with such immediate hostility, drama, or coldness when you simply say no? Why is it that when you try to protect your time, your energy, or your emotional well-being, you are so often accused of being selfish, insensitive, or ungrateful? The answer is as uncomfortable as it is ultimately liberating. Those who make you feel guilty for setting a boundary very often do not respect you. They respect your utility. They value your function in their life. That's the truth. There exists a type of person, often very close to us, sometimes even dear, who does not actually want a relationship with you based on mutual exchange and respect. What they want is unrestricted, reliable access to your energy, your time, and your emotional labor. For these individuals, your presence, your help, your listening ear, your reliability are resources they believe they have a right to consume. This is rarely born of conscious malice. More often, it is because they themselves have been conditioned this way, and they have simply become accustomed to benefiting from your inability to say no. And when you finally try to break this deeply ingrained cycle, they react not with understanding, but as if you are committing a profound personal betrayal. But the truth is so very different. A healthy, clean no is just a choice. It is a statement of capacity. It is the exercise of a basic human right. Emotionally mature, secure people understand this intuitively. They do not demand lengthy explanations. They do not dramatize the refusal. They do not retaliate with silence or veiled criticism. They understand on a fundamental level that the freedom to say no is precisely what makes any yes offered to them truly valuable and authentic. True consent in any context only exists where there is a genuine possibility of refusal. Real care and respect only exist where there is a fundamental respect for the other person's boundaries and autonomy. Now, observe the opposite behavior. See how emotionally immature or entitled people react to your no. They may raise their voices, they may use emotional blackmail, they may play the victim, they may try to turn the entire situation around so that you are the one left feeling guilty and wrong. These reactions are not mere expressions of hurt feelings. They are very often calculated or instinctive attempts to re-establish control. They are unconscious manipulation mechanisms designed to restore the old, comfortable balance where you yielded and they received. It is painful to recognize this, but it is absolutely essential for your liberation. If someone only remains comfortable in your life and only treats you with warmth and respect while you are saying yes to everything, that person does not truly love you. They love what you offer. They love the function you perform. And a love that depends on your constant self-annihilation is not love. It is dependency. It is use. It is a form of quiet domination. The world-renowned researcher Brené Brown is emphatic in stating that no is a complete sentence. When you feel obligated to explain, justify, or apologize for a boundary, you are, without even realizing it, trying to convince the other person that you are still deserving of their affection, even while being an inconvenience to them. And this is the exact reflection of the toxic shame we spoke of earlier. You are operating from the belief that you need to pay an emotional toll, to bargain for your right to exist with dignity. But true freedom begins the moment you stop negotiating your worth with those who should not be at the table of your life in the first place. You begin to understand that respect is not something you beg for. It is something you demand simply by showing up fully as yourself. And that the truest test of any relationship lies precisely in how the other person reacts to your no, to your inconvenience, to your humanity. However, to sustain this new, empowered positioning, it is necessary to break the lifelong habit of justifying yourself all the time. It takes immense courage not to explain, not to soften your stance, not to apologize for preserving yourself. And that is exactly what we will talk about next. The immense power of no as a declaration of identity, and why stopping the endless justification of your boundaries can be the most transformative act of your entire life. Saying no without a trail of justifications seems like a simple, almost trivial gesture, but for people who have been programmed for a lifetime to seek permission, it represents nothing short of an internal revolution. After all, we have been meticulously trained since childhood to soften, mitigate, and justify every single boundary we ever attempt to set. We constantly say, "Sorry, I'm just really tired," or "I would love to, but I already have another commitment," or "It's nothing personal, it's just that..." And with each added explanation, we subtly dilute the strength and clarity of our own decision. The subliminal message we convey to the world and to ourselves is painfully clear. I know I am wrong for refusing you, so please let me try to redeem myself in your eyes by offering a good enough reason. But here is one of the most impactful lessons we can internalize. No is a complete sentence. It requires no commas, no justifications, no attached guilt, just no. And that no, when said firmly, without aggression, but with crystal clarity, carries extraordinary power. It asserts to the world that your energy, your time, your presence are not communal bargaining chips. They are sacred and non-negotiable, and that you do not need to emotionally kneel or bargain for your worth every time you choose to use them wisely. When you stop justifying your boundaries, you send a profound message, not just to others, but to the most critical audience of all, yourself. That message is, I respect myself enough to not negotiate my existence. You are recognizing that your choices have intrinsic value, even if the other person disagrees or is disappointed. This is not arrogance, it is the bedrock of dignity, because dignity is not something you negotiate for, it is not something you defend. It is a state of being that you hold within yourself, and it stands, unshaken, in silence. Of course, this new way of being will feel uncomfortable, especially for those people in your life who are deeply accustomed to your old, permissive version, the always available, always conciliatory, always agreeable you. But that discomfort they feel is not your responsibility to manage or soothe. If someone interprets your clean, clear no as a lack of love or care, perhaps that person has never truly learned what it means to love someone without also controlling them. And if someone demands lengthy explanations simply to accept your basic boundaries, perhaps they have never truly recognized you as a whole, autonomous individual. They have only ever seen you as a resource. Interrupting this deeply ingrained cycle is painful work. You will feel intensely tempted to give in, to soften your stance, to over-explain until the other person feels better. You will feel a powerful urge to protect the other person's feelings, even in situations where that other person has never, ever protected yours. But this is the moment for firmness, the moment to remember that every single time you say yes to someone else simply to avoid a conflict, you are simultaneously saying a profound no to yourself. You are saying no to your own needs, your own peace, your own integrity. And each of these self-betrayals, each of these denied no's to your own well-being, accumulates a terrible emotional price: simmering resentment, profound exhaustion, and a pattern of self-sabotage. Stopping the justification of your boundaries does not mean you are becoming cold or indifferent. It means you are finally abandoning the desperate need to prove to the world that you have a right to exist as you are. It means learning to trust that your integrity does not depend on the fluctuating approval of others. And above all, it means understanding that true, lasting self-respect begins the moment you stop begging for it from others. But merely recognizing this truth intellectually is not enough. To truly sustain a no with courage and consistency, you need to undertake the monumental task of freeing yourself from the entire mental and emotional system that has been installed within you since childhood. A system that has falsely associated essential self-care with selfishness. And it is about this process of active reprogramming, about how to break this conditioning and relearn the art of putting yourself first without apology, that we will now turn our attention. Breaking away from a deep emotional programming is not an impulsive act of defiance. It is a slow, deep psychological process that requires continuous awareness, immense courage, and daily practice. Learning to say no without the accompanying wave of guilt is not just a surface-level change in behavior. It is a fundamental reconstruction of your identity. It is the conscious deconstruction of an entire internal system that for years or even decades taught you that your existence only has value if it is in constant service to others. And believe me, this system, this old program, does not go away quietly. It will scream in protest, it will resist, it will sabotage your efforts. But it can be deactivated as long as you are willing to patiently and courageously confront everything you have been taught to believe is true about yourself and your worth. This reprogramming begins in earnest, the moment you realize that the guilt you feel when you try to protect yourself is not a moral compass guiding you toward righteousness. It is a conditioned reflex, a phantom limb of obligation, and like any reflex with awareness and practice, it can be reconditioned and rewritten. But this requires a direct, conscious confrontation with that internal voice, the voice that immediately accuses you of being selfish the moment you set a limit, the voice that insists you will disappoint someone irrevocably, that you will lose their love forever. You must learn, through practice, to recognize that voice not as your own essential truth, but as the echo of an emotional past, a ghost of conditioning that is still trying to govern your present-day choices. The renowned researcher Brené Brown speaks profoundly about the importance of vulnerability in this very process. She reframes vulnerability not as a weakness, but as the ultimate measure of courage. By having the courage to preserve yourself, to say no, you are inevitably making yourself vulnerable. You are exposing yourself to potential criticism, to rejection, and to the judgment of others. And it is in this exact space of emotional exposure that your deepest strength begins to emerge and solidify. Vulnerability, as she states, is not winning or losing. It is having the courage to show up and be seen when you cannot control the outcome. It is the measure of your commitment to your own truth. And your truth is that you were not born to live a life of endlessly negating yourself. You were conditioned to do so, and that conditioning, no matter how deep, can be broken. This process requires practice, and like any practice, it is best started with small, manageable acts. Saying no to a social commitment you genuinely do not have the energy for. Not responding to a work message immediately when you are exhausted and off the clock. Stopping yourself from launching into a long explanation for a decision that is intimate and sovereign to you. By doing these small things, you begin to literally rewrite the circuits of your own brain. This isn't just a metaphor, it is science. Neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to form new neural connections throughout life, is your greatest ally here. Every single time you uphold a boundary, even while the old guilt is screaming at you, you are forging a new neural pathway. You are physically reinforcing a new, empowering internal narrative. A narrative that says, I deserve to preserve myself, my needs are valid, my worth is not for sale. But this journey of reclamation is not just an individual, internal one. When you start to position yourself more clearly in the world around you will inevitably react. Some people will surprise you. They will adjust and respect the new, more authentic you. Others will distance themselves, unable to relate to you without the old dynamic. And some will confront you directly, challenging your right to change. This is all an expected and necessary part of the process. Because by changing your own stance, you are altering the unspoken power dynamics in your relationships. And those who benefited from your silence and compliance are now being asked to adjust, and they may be deeply disturbed by the sound of your newfound voice. Therefore, this emotional reprogramming is not a comfortable or easy path. It is often lonely and frightening. But it is the only path that leads to genuine authenticity. It is the only path to finding a lasting inner peace. It is the only way to build relationships that are based on mutual choice and respect, rather than on obligation and guilt. Saying no firmly, clearly, and without guilt is an act of profound personal revolution. It is you standing before the world and declaring, I exist fully and completely, even when I am not available to you. I matter, even when my answer is no. But there is still one last stark truth that needs to be faced head-on, one that may hurt more than all the previous ones combined, but a truth that also carries the ultimate, irrevocable power to liberate you once and for all. And it is with this final truth that we will conclude. If someone punishes you for having a boundary, for saying no, that person never truly loved you. They only ever loved your availability, your compliance, your utility. Let's talk about that now, with clarity and compassion. The moment of deepest truth arrives. This is the part that almost no one wants to hear, the part we resist with every fiber of our being, because it threatens the very foundations of our relational world. And yet, it is the part that everyone, at some subconscious level, has already felt and feared. Because when you finally start to respect yourself, to set clear boundaries, to say no without bending or breaking, something inevitable and necessary happens. Some people will quietly distance themselves. Others will become irritated and cold. Some will fall into a silence that feels like punishment, treating your simple boundary as a personal offense. And still others will actively try to manipulate your guilt, making you believe that you are being ungrateful, cold, or fundamentally insensitive. But the question that must be asked, with simple, direct, unflinching honesty, is this. If someone punishes you for having a boundary, for exercising a basic human right, did that person ever truly love you? Or did they only ever love what you provided? Did they love your constant availability, your unwavering compliance, your self-sacrifice? This distinction is not semantic, it is absolutely crucial. Genuine, healthy love recognizes and celebrates individuality. It values space and autonomy. It respects the other person's sovereignty. Those who truly love you do not demand that you nullify yourself to prove that love. They do not charge you for unrestricted access to your energy and spirit. They do not turn your reasonable refusal into a personal attack or a character flaw. On the contrary, those who truly love you will embrace your no with natural understanding. They will recognize that your act of preservation is not an abandonment of them. It is simply you making a conscious choice to care for the vessel from which all your giving flows. But when a relationship is based on utility and function, and not on genuine affection and respect, your no becomes an obstacle, an annoyance, a mirror that reflects back to the other person that they can no longer take you for granted, that they no longer have control over your choices. And then the punishment comes, often disguised as hurt feelings or righteous indignation. Rejection, silence, criticism, drama, emotional blackmail. All of it is a desperate, often unconscious, attempt to restore the old balance where you yielded and they received, where you were predictable and they were comfortable. But the liberating, albeit painful truth is this: if your lack of unlimited availability is enough to destroy a relationship, then that relationship was already corrupted from the very start. It was built on a shaky foundation of transaction, not on the solid ground of mutual care. Brené Brown's research teaches us that the most authentic, resilient relationships are those that actually flourish when both parties feel the freedom to say no without a fear of losing the bond or facing retaliation. That freedom is the ultimate test of a relationship's health, because a love that cannot survive your freedom, your individuality, your humanity, is not love at all. It is a form of possession. It is a neediness. It is an addiction disguised as care. Saying no from this empowered place is not about rejecting another person. It is about refusing the worn-out role of the martyr. It is about freeing yourself from the cruel idea that you need to be constantly useful and self-sacrificing to be worthy of affection. And it is also a powerful, necessary filter for your life. Because when you start to take a firm stand for yourself, you will very quickly discover who truly loves and values you, and who only valued the domesticated, convenient, always available version of you that you were conditioned to be. The version that smiled while suffering inside, that accepted everything to avoid conflict, that constantly blamed themselves for simply existing with their own needs and desires. This revelation can be deeply painful, yes. It can feel like a loss, but it is also profoundly liberating. It is the pain of removing a splinter that has been festering for years, because in the place of these draining, one-sided relationships based on control and guilt, you will slowly but surely make room for new, more mature, lighter, and more authentic connections. Connections where you can show up as your whole, imperfect human self without ever having to negotiate your dignity or apologize for your existence. So if this message has spoken to you, if it has touched something deep within you that knows this truth, I want you to do something simple but powerful. I want you to type one sentence in the comments below, a declaration to yourself and a show of solidarity with everyone else on this same path. Just type, "I choose to respect myself," because this simple act of writing it down is already a powerful commitment to your own worth. And please, share this video with one person you know who also needs to hear this truth today. You might just help them find the courage to begin their own liberation. And above all, keep going. Keep listening. The next part of this journey is just as important as what you've heard here. It delves even deeper into the practices of self-knowledge and breaking the patterns that keep us imprisoned. Your transformation has started here in this moment, but I promise you, it does not end here. I'll see you in the next one.